Welcome to this live broadcast from Students for Liberty. This is part one of a joint webinar series with SFL and the Atlas Society called Truth and Toleration, an Introduction to Objectivism. Our guest is David Kelley. Dr. Kelley received his PhD in philosophy from Princeton University and later taught philosophy at Vassar College and Brandeis University. In 1990, he founded the Atlas Society, a leading institute for research and education on Ayn Rand's philosophy of Objectivism. He is the author of many books and articles on philosophy and politics, including the book we are going to discuss today, The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand, Truth and Toleration in the Objectivist Movement. David, to get started, tell us a bit about Ayn Rand and how you got involved in her ideas.
Okay, very briefly, Ayn Rand was born in 1905 in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her family was Jewish, and her father was ran a modest pharmacy. So Ayn Rand was 12 when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917. They expropriated the family business, and the life became considerably more harsh for them. Ayn Rand recognized at the time, even as a young teenage girl really, that there was something not only bad politically and economically about communism, but morally. That the sacrifice of the individual, she just, at an early date, she said, this is evil. It's not ideal, it's evil. And so she went through college and then fled to the United States. She went to Hollywood first. She'd always been enchanted while in Russia with American films, the silent films of the day. And then she worked there for a while, but then began writing novels and became a best-selling author. The two best known are The Fountainhead in 1943 and Atlas Shrugged in 1957. So I began reading her works when I was in high school. I think by the time I went to college, I'd read everything that she'd written up to that point. And I was just bowled over by the insight, the moral perspective that she brought in her portrayal of rational individualism, and also by the quality of the writing and just the power of her logic. To digress briefly for a second, I've heard all my life people saying she's a clunky writer. She just hits you over the head with the same idea over and over again with a 2x4. But the ironic thing is that they typically go on to misrepresent completely what she stood for. So, sometimes I think she should have used a heavier stick than a 2x4. But anyway, so I went to college to study philosophy, and the objectivist philosophy just stood the test of time as I learned more about other schools and systems and got involved in arguments and discussions. And then as I got my degree, I got to know some of the people in the inner circle who surrounded Ayn Rand in New York City. I was living in New York at the time. And so that's how I started out.
Okay, and then you later on went to found the Atlas Society. How did that come about?
Well, in the late 1980s, I spent time teaching at Vassar, but I'd left. And I was living as a freelance writer. I worked on a logic textbook, which it still is in print, and writing for magazines. But I was also doing a lot of speaking and writing for objectivist publications and speaking to objectivist groups and so forth. But over that, during that stretch of time, there began to be tensions and conflicts among the intellectual leaders. And I, in particular, felt that there was a kind of rigidity and exclusionary attitude that was too common. So I just felt that we needed a new direction, and there was no way. I had to do it on my own with a couple of people who felt the same way. So we started what's now the Atlas Society. That was in 1990. And at the same time, I wrote a book called Truth and Toleration to explain my views on these things. And then, and that book was later, we later brought it out in a new edition called The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand.
Wow, so let's talk about some of those conflicts, starting with libertarianism. It seems odd that followers of Ayn Rand would object to speaking to a libertarian group. Wasn't Rand an advocate of freedom and capitalism?
Yes, I should have mentioned that the last straw in my conflicts with some of the other people was when I was denounced for speaking to a libertarian group back in '88, I think it was. And So yes, your question is perfectly apt. It's quite bizarre. Rand was a huge advocate of liberty, capitalism, limited government, etc. Basically libertarianism.
Right.
But there was a kind of history here. Rand's work inspired many people to get interested in libertarianism in the first place. This is back in the 60s, 70s. It still goes on today. She's still a major gateway to the libertarian movement. But her philosophy is a whole systematic philosophy involving ethics and a view of human nature and everything as the basis or ground on which the doctrines of liberty have to rest. Well, many libertarians liked the political ideas and didn't sign on to the rest. And so Rand felt, and many objectivists at the time felt, you can't defend liberty without having a solid moral basis. So that was one point. You're just going to discredit the cause. So that was one point. The second point was when libertarianism started to get organized as a movement, political movement in the 60s, 70s, there was a lot of subjectivism involved. People who felt, well, you can't violate anyone's rights, that's an absolute, but anything pertaining to your own life and anything goes. I mean, this was the aftermath of the counterculture of the 60s. And there was a lot of just, sex, drug, and rock and roll, to use that code phrase. I remember Ed Crane, the co-founder of the Cato Institute and longtime leader, was speaking at one of our conferences and recalling his experience in the libertarian movement, actually the early Libertarian Party. He said, I went to a conference, the first time I'd met libertarians in large numbers, and I'd heard about alternative lifestyles, but I had no idea how many alternatives there were. But Rand believed in an objective morality, so that was another problem. And then finally, there were one wing of libertarianism was anarchist. And whereas objectivists believe in the need for government. We don't hate government, we just think it has a very specific, delimited role. If it carries that role out, it's a good day's work. But we do need government in some way. So that was the history. But by the late 80s, I thought, look, this movement has matured. The Cato Institute was flourishing. Others were being formed. There was a lot of serious intellectual work, including on philosophy and values. And I thought, hey, these things it's changed. But unfortunately, a lot of my former colleagues were kind of stuck in the old perspective and remained there for a while.
Sure. So maybe we can come back to the objectivist libertarian issue, but first, what were the other conflicts that you mentioned?
Yes, there were other issues, and as it turned out, they were much more important. In fact, the libertarian issue turned out to be kind of a superficial sideshow because almost everyone in the objectivist movement, however orthodox they may be, engages with libertarian groups and organizations like SFL and many others. So one of the underlying issues had to do with toleration. It came right out of my experience, out of the issue where I went to give a talk to a libertarian group. When I was denounced, I said, hey, I went there to talk about why you need objectivist ideas to have a solid defense of liberty. And I was accused of sanctioning them. They were evil. They were evil by the very fact that they were libertarian but not objectivist. This did not compute in my mind. I mean, I knew too many of them. And so I made a case that toleration is a good practice for a philosophy that preaches rationality and independence. And that's how you engage with people. You don't judge them until you have good reason to, even if you disagree with them.
Right. So when we talk about open and closed objectivism, what does that mean exactly?
Well, that turned out to be the underlying crux, and in some ways it still is a live issue today. Let me start with an analogy. take Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. This is a copyrighted work. It's a work of art. No, it would be wrong and actually illegal to go in and rewrite the dialogue and publish it as a, no, it's her work. She created it. Every word in that is what it is. But the philosophy of objectivism is a discovery. It's about, it's a body of knowledge about the world. And so it seems to me that it should be open to expansion, refinement, some correction if need be. I mean, in the same way Darwin's theory of evolution is, or Einstein's theory of relativity, or Milton Friedman's theory of monetary economics. That's how knowledge grows. And I just don't see any basis for considering the philosophy closed, which means it includes all but only what Ayn Rand had either said or approved while she was alive. And that's too constrictive. It means no new objectivist work will be forthcoming any more than there's any new Latin literature. It's fixed, it's done. So that is, to some extent, a remaining issue. And I think, to be fair to the more orthodox people, it comes out of a deep respect for Ayn Rand, which I certainly share. She was a brilliant, brilliant philosopher. And, you know, as Newton himself said, you know, of his work, anything I can contribute, I think I'm standing on the shoulders of a giant. But there are issues that she did not address. One of them is the issue of the ethics of benevolence, how we extend ourselves to other people. And I felt that there is a very strong case based in the objectivist ethics for that, and I see examples of it all through her novels. So I wrote another short book called Unrugged Individualism, arguing, no, this is a very important virtue. And, you know, I would love to hear what Ayn Rand thought about it, because I would really like to, you know, she's so brilliant.
Right.
But I can't. So I think over 20 years it stood the test of time. I consider it part of objectivism, but it can't be if objectivism is a closed system.
Yeah, I feel like open and closed objectivism is such a hot topic right now in the objectivist movement. And so I'm curious, when you wrote Truth and Toleration, what was the reaction from society, from the objectivist believers?
Well, there were two sides of it. Some of the people I used to work with considered me an apostate. I mean, in almost religious language and attitude, you know, shunning, and you can't talk to this guy, or you're sanctioning evil. And so that persisted for a long time. It's kind of that is diminishing a bit now. But on the other hand, there was a great positive reaction from people who had been inspired by Ayn Rand's works, maybe had, back in the 60s when there was a more active movement, had gotten involved, taken some courses and things, but had become alienated from the attitude of some of the leading objectivists. Well, when I came out with an alternative, we had people who hadn't been involved in any way for a long time, 10 years, 15 years, join our group, come to our conferences and so forth. That was very gratifying. In fact, that was our first test of whether this is a viable operation.
Mm-hmm. So does it die down or does it continue?
It continues to an extent. And I think the only remaining basic philosophical issue is about this open versus closed nature of objectivism. But there are also some stylistic differences. I mean, we, at our conferences, we provide good material by leading experts, but we always try to conduct them in the spirit that involves both tolerance and benevolence. That is, you know, we don't jump down people's throats if they ask a dumb question or a challenging question. And sometimes when I talk to people who go to other conferences, they say, you know, we don't, it doesn't feel as open to that kind of discussion. And this is a matter of really not so much doctrine as style. There's a deeper sense of alienation from the rest of the culture on the other side, I think. And we feel You know, we're always looking for good things. I mean, we all are. I'm talking about differences in emphasis. And then, you know, I suppose I should say, there is a personal conflict between, you know, some of the people and myself, because we used to work together. We used to be buds.
Yeah.
And we're not anymore. So.
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little off script here and throw you a curveball. But talking about objectivism, we have a lot of eager students watching who are interested in these ideas. And there are a lot of different intellectual routes they can go and explore. So why objectivism? Why Ayn Rand? What's one takeaway you want to give all of these students on these ideas?
Well, I think the one takeaway I'd say is if you want to be effective in defending a free society, you have to know why you believe in it. And I think my sense from all the people I know is that, I mean, they may not agree with objectivism about religion or atheism. They may not agree about, you know, specific points in ethics. But you have to have some sense of the unique and irreplaceable value of each person to him or herself, that we are ends in ourselves. And that is why, that's the basic reason. And so that's a point. But how do we live that? We have to live it by our minds, by our rational faculties. And to do that, we need freedom. If I'm blocked from doing what I think is best, as long as it's in, you know, I'm not violating anyone's rights, but if I'm still blocked by government regulation or my tax money is taken to give to people that I wouldn't have chosen to support, I'm the object of coercion. I'm being used as a means to the ends of other people. And that is, I think getting that moral point is what Ayn Rand is so brilliant at. So brilliant. Her characters have a kind of autonomy that it goes so deep that it isn't even, it's as if they take it for granted. They're not boastful or proud or, you know, in the bad sense, conceited or anything. They are their own people. They are their own men and women, and at such a deep level that, for example, one of the things I love about Ayn Rand's characters, especially Dagny Taggart, the heroine of Atlas Shrugged, that she's working with her brother who runs the railroad. She's a VP of operations. She's the one who gets everything done. He's a nut, and he spends all his time with his political buddies, and he's the essential crony capitalist. And they're always having a conflict. And Dagny explains patiently, sometimes gets angry, but when she leaves his office, he doesn't rent any more space in her head. She's done. She's off for work. And that's a kind of one reflection of the deep kind of autonomy that I'm talking about, which I think you find in Ayn Rand's work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's beautiful. If you had to recommend just one Ayn Rand book to somebody who's just discovering the ideas of objectivism, what would it be? Now, that's probably a tough question because there's so many good ones. But
yeah. Sometimes people ask. In fact, objectivists often trade experiences about this. Which book do you like better, The Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged? And my answer is always whichever one I read last, because I just always discover something new. I think they're very different. But I would say Atlas Shrugged is more philosophical, and it's richer. I think it's a richer literary work, in literary terms, than The Fountainhead. But it's also longer, and there's more or less explicit philosophy packed inside those pages, so it can be tough going. One of Rand's early works is quite interesting. It's called Anthem, and it's something she wrote in the 1930s as a novelette, really. It's a dystopian novel about a future in which has gone collectivist, and just as later George Orwell with 1984 and also Aldous Huxley with Brave New World. But unlike those other books, Rand's dystopian society was not high-tech, it was primitive, because they had squelched the power of the individual and the individual's mind to the point where there was technology, and no one could run it. It all crumbled, it disappeared, and they forgot about it.
Yeah.
So they were still, they reverted to candles and farming.
Right.
And it's about one man's escape from that and discovery. I won't give away the
no spoiler alert.
No spoiler.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful short story, short novel, 100 pages or so. And by the way, the Atlas Society is, right now we're working on a graphic novel of Anthem that we're going to publish. That should be out next year. And that will be a really exciting edition.
Yeah, to wrap up, is there any other exciting things that the Atlas Society is up to currently?
Yes, in addition to the graphic novel of Anthem, we have a student program that we're putting a lot of emphasis on. It's called No Banned Books. The idea is to recruit students who would like to have Ayn Rand's works included in their college curricula, to gather signatures and petition professors in relevant fields. Would you include something from Ayn Rand? And so we're working with Turning Point on that, and Turning Point USA, and also with Students for Liberty, because you have such great student networks of volunteers on campus, all organized. And so those who are interested can sign up, become part of our team. We have, I think, I can't remember the numbers now exactly. They keep growing. This is started in September. We're going to, we already have at least 10 professors who have signed on that they want to do it, which is a small number, but it's a huge accomplishment because Ayn Rand is not often taught in colleges. But we have hundreds of students who are out there working on this.
Yeah.
And then we're also, and this might be something to keep your eye out for, next week we're going to release 2 short videos. They're called socially transmitted diseases. That's the gimmick for two short videos about envy.
Okay.
Why and what it is and why it is so awful. They're very well done, very well produced.
Yeah.
So keep your eye out for those.
Excited to see those. Those will be great. Awesome. Well, there you have it, folks. That's about all the time we have. Thanks again for watching, and to David for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Objectivism, head to the Students for Liberty Academy link in the comments below. If you want to register for LibertyCon, which you should, it's formally known as the International Students for Liberty Conference, hit the link in the comments as well. You can also go to atlassociety.org to learn more about their work, and you can also find David's book, The Contested Legacy of Ayn Rand, on Amazon. Thanks again. We'll see you next week.